Hi and welcome back to Bike Speeds. This week we're going to service this Scott Speedster in time for a race next weekend. So this is a pre-race service, checking through the bike to make sure that everything on it is okay and precise and how it needs to be for the race. You can see in general the bike is in trained on condition. There was a big build up of grease all over the drivetrain. No major problems yet, but it definitely needs a good clean. We need to replace the chain. You can see here it's quite well worn. Once it gets further than that, it will start to wear the drivetrain itself, so I'm going to replace that chain. First things first, we take the bike apart. This is where we find the problems with the bike to solve later on. The cassette now comes off. This was very stiff to break off, definitely over tightened. We also then take off the spoke protector to clean that as well. You can see this rear cassette, not too grimy, not too worn, but we'll clean that up. I'll put that through my ultrasonic cleaner. You can see here with the rear derailleur, very much the same. A little bit of debris on there, doesn't look too bad on the surface. We will clean that up, re-lubricate it, and that will go back on the bike and actuate just a little bit smoother, a little bit nicer than it already is. Same with that front derailleur, very similar principles. Bike in general was not in bad condition, this one. Off comes the pedal arm and the front chain ring, which you can see was pretty grimy and gritty, so it definitely needed this clean. Brakes, we also take those off. I'm going to take those off so that I can clean them up and lubricate the points on those that pivot as well. You tend to accumulate a lot of debris on your brakes because of the wheel spinning, and it's sort of one of the centrifugal places that the wheel will always catch debris on the brakes. It is what it is, so we make sure that they're nice and clean. Brakes are very prone to rusting, fouling up, and then not actuating nicely, not releasing nicely. The mount bolt here, you can see it's got the early signs of a tinge of corrosion on there, so we'll clean that up. I'll then use our copper grease to make sure that that will stop that from corroding any further and just aid it into the future for coming on off the bike. So now I'm just putting everything into our ultrasonic cleaner. I'll run these parts through before I begin to wash them down and then lubricate them. So rear derailleur, jockey wheels, they're all now nice and clean. I'm using our detailing brush there to wash those components off. We're just using warm soapy water there. Every now and then some of the grease pulls together in the corner of the part in the cleaner, so the idea of washing it after is to flick that all out. Chain set, doesn't do any harm to wash that down as well. We didn't put that through the ultrasonic cleaner, we've just literally washed this one down. Also the cassette, we make sure that that's mint so as it's ready to go back on the bike. Even the spoke protector here, that went through the cleaning to get it as clean as we could. And now I'm using our grease selection there in the stand. Here I'm using our premium grease to lubricate the jockey wheels themselves. They haven't got bearings in them, but it's always handy to lubricate them. And I'm using Loctite 222 there on the axles themselves for the jockey wheels to make sure that that doesn't come undone when it's on the bike. Copper grease on the thread there of the thumb adjuster, general purpose grease on the actual turn part of the thumb adjuster, all helps it actuate nicely. Premium grease on the spring to stop it corroding. Nice thin general purpose oil on the pivot points, same on the front derailleur there. General purpose oil on the pivot points, premium grease on the spring, general purpose oil on the pivot points. We're actually using there silicone grease on the slider of the brake, same principle with the skewers. Thin oil on the pivot, general purpose grease where we have metal to metal, copper grease on the thread itself, and every component there is now lubricated nicely, and I'm happy they're ready to go back on the bike. So next up I wash the frame down. We're using soapy spray there to wash it down, and then we just use our big softy brush to actually wash the frame down itself. We do sell these on our website, the same with our greases, and also the same with our super slick cables, which you'll see me refitting a new derailleur cable on the rear of this bike. We have a super slick selection on our website, so please do check that out. We've put a link in the description below. It's definitely worth a browse to see if there's anything you'd like for your own bike. Little detail here, there's a random residue of a sticker on the down tube, so I cleaned that off with some methylated spirits before I begin the journey of cleaning up the wheels. I like to wash the wheels down. It gives me an opportunity to check the spokes, make sure everything's okay on that one and I also use our general purpose grease on the hub itself before putting the cassette back on. Will stop it binding in the future, and then I torque that up with our torque wrench. Another little detail here is I'm going to turn the tyre so that the logo of the tyre manufacturer is over the valve. That way, if we've got a puncture when we're out on the road, you can figure out where in the tyre it was. If you then got a second puncture for any reason and you know it's roughly in the same place, you know you haven't cleared that debris and you know exactly where it's going to be. It's just good practice to keep your logos lined up. Makes it a little bit easier when you have a puncture out on the road as well to figure it out. Now you can see here on the rear derailleur cable itself, it's very notchy running through that outer. There was a little kink in there somewhere that was causing that not to actuate nicely. You could pull it up through the gears, but it wasn't dropping down the gears nicely. So I'm going to swap that out for one of our super slick cables there. These are a lovely tightly wound stainless steel cable. They're a few hundredths of a millimetre thinner, tight around, so they run through the outers much smoother than a standard cable. So we're just going to pop one of those in before we put the rear derailleur back on the bike. On goes the chain set. I like to torque these up as I put them back on so they're in their final position for the front derailleur adjustments. So that's what I've done there. Get that chain set on, get that front derailleur on, and I noticed the tail of this front derailleur was a little bit long, so I've nipped that off, put a new end on. That will stop that fouling with the pedal arm or catching on the rider as they're riding. So I got that just at the right length that we needed there for that one. On goes the rear derailleur. You notice there I also checked the derailleur hanger to make sure that's not loose before I put on our new cable and tighten that up ready for adjustments. I've got a little cable end there that actually gives me the length I need to make sure all my cables are the same length. I'm using copper grease there in the mount of this rear brake because that will stop it binding and sticking in the frame with corrosion. General purpose grease even on the thumb adjuster there. You don't see that very often, but it will make a world of difference to adjusting the brake along the way as the brakes wear. The same here on the front brake. Copper grease on the mount to stop that corrosion, to enable it to be released easier next time. General purpose grease on the thumb adjuster before I put that brake together. So I'm quite happy now that this bike's really beginning to go together nicely, so I can pop the wheels on before I can just do my adjustments and get the new chain on there. We've got a lovely Tiagra chain to match the chain set. Make sure that everything's adjusted correctly. So I've done my adjustments now. The gears are working nicely up and down, front and rear. Everything's shifting nicely. I've adjusted the brakes. Just give those a few pulls to make sure that they're centered to the wheel and that they grab the wheel evenly both sides of the rim, and then I can work through the bike with a torque wrench. So I check the levers themselves. You can see here a little bit loose, needed torquing up for sure. I check things like the stem, so I'm just going through the crown here and then the steerer tube itself to make sure that everything's torqued correctly. And even things like the brakes, I even check things like the pinch bolts, the brake pads to make sure they're not going to turn on the bike, the mounts themselves, pedals. I just go through everything on the bike to make sure that it's absolutely torqued precisely and correctly, and that this bike is ready to race at the weekend without any potential of problems with things coming loose. Especially things like saddles. You can see here as I'm about to tighten up this front bolt, it's a little bit loose. Very common on most bikes for the saddle to be loose and needing a torque up, so we check things like that. Could be a game changer for a race if the saddle came loose and fell off the bike. To make sure that that's safe and that everything about the bike is right. We are actually about to have probably 2 weeks off because we're refitting our workshop, so you may find there's a couple of weeks where we don't have a video. But thanks for watching this one. I hope you've enjoyed it. I wish this rider all the very best with her race next weekend, and if you have enjoyed this video, please do subscribe, do check out our website, and we'll see you again very soon. Thanks again, and bye for now.